Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode on forgiveness. I wanted to speak about forgiveness because of its power to bring about emotional and physical wellness is so worth talking about. Now, as a medical hypnotherapist, I can't prescribe medication, but I do make one exception to that rule. I prescribe forgiveness because it can make such a positive difference in our body. And as it turns out, there are studies out there that show that forgiving is actually good for our health. Not forgiving puts a lot of stress on our heart. So forgiveness is good medicine. It's good for our heart, good for our organs, just plain good for our body. Now, I don't need studies to convince me because I know from personal experience, from working with my clients, the potential that it has to help us release emotional pain and heal. When you change how you look at something, the thing you see changes. And forgiveness is no exception. Because when you change how you see forgiveness, the act of forgiving becomes different. So I would like you to please open your hearts and consider perceiving forgiveness from a higher place and a wiser space. Some people believe that we should forgive for religious or spiritual reasons, to become better human beings, so we can feel pressured to forgive. The trouble with that is that sometimes the more pressured we feel, the less we want to forgive. And if we do end up forgiving, it can feel like this begrudging, reluctant feeling that doesn't feel genuine or last because it does feel forced. And so instead of thinking of forgiveness as something that we have to do, that we have to give up that anger and resentment when we really don't want to, what we can do is just shift our thinking, shift our perception so that forgiving becomes something we want to do, not for others, but for ourselves, because we deserve the good things that it brings. Forgiveness, I believe, is something that should come from a real deep desire to do that. The truth is that forgiving puts you first, and it can be one of the best, most selfish things you do for you, for your life. When you forgive from a place of higher emotional awareness, the act of forgiving does not disempower you. It does the opposite. It empowers you greatly. Forgiving at its best is something that we do not to make others happy, but to make ourselves happy. Not to necessarily satisfy any religious obligations, but to satisfy ourselves. You do it for you, to create a better, more peaceful present moment and move into the future where you get to feel freer and more at peace. Forgiveness can make us feel powerful because ultimately it's our choice whether we forgive or we don't forgive. As humans, we can feel more powerful when we deny someone forgiveness rather than when we choose to bestow it, especially if that person took away our power to feel worthy or lovable. Refusing to forgive them can be a way of taking our power back, or exerting our power over them. We may think that refusing to forgive someone keeps us strong, but the reality is that it can weaken us because it keeps us stuck in so much hurt. But when we start seeing forgiveness as a greater source of personal power when we bestow it, rather than when we withhold it, it can really become something that we want to do for ourselves. You may feel powerful when you choose to not forgive someone, but actually the opposite is true, because it is when you forgive that you get the full potential of your power back. Because when you cannot let go of those heavy negative feelings, well, those emotions have power and control over you. Forgiveness can help us regulate our emotions and take back our power over our emotional well-being. It can motivate us to give up that resentment and anger when we realize that in doing that, we can disarm and prevent those feelings from taking our peace, our wellness away from us. Forgiveness work is a gift because you give your body permission to release so many negative emotions. It is a powerful pathway to happiness and health. When we forgive, it's like we're proclaiming the failures of our parents, the failures of those who hurt us, their limitations don't get to live our life for us. Their actions, their words don't get to define who we are and how we feel about ourselves. When we forgive, it's not that we're saying that the harm that others caused us will ever be acceptable, but in forgiving, we're willing to make peace, to accept the what is, and stop struggling with who they are, what they did, because that just keeps creating a reality that can keep us stuck in that unworthiness, that sadness, that anger, that fear. I tell my clients that those that made them feel unlovable don't have to all of a sudden show their love in order for them to forgive those individuals. Because when we forgive, we gain the power to set ourselves free of their limitations, of their failures. And we can use that failing to motivate us as an opportunity to grow a deep love of self so that we don't have to be so dependent on others to feel lovable. Those that abandoned you don't have to necessarily be there for you now in order for you to forgive them. Because through forgiving, you set yourself free of their power to make you feel abandoned and alone. And you can use that failing to motivate you to discover your own power to be there for you. When you forgive, you set yourself free to begin to write your own story. I think it's important to understand that forgiveness does not right the wrongs of the past. You may feel that forgiving others means that you're suddenly okay with what they did or said and how that made you feel. But forgiveness does not condone, does not excuse, does not justify another's harmful or hurtful actions in any way. You may feel that if you forgive someone, that it lets them off the hook. But forgiveness does not absolve others of responsibility. They're still responsible to their higher selves. They're still responsible to the universe for their actions. Letting go of the hurt, letting go of those grudges and forgiving doesn't mean that the person that hurt you doesn't suffer the consequences. Whether or not we believe in karma, I think most of us would agree that for every action, there is a consequence. We may not see that consequence, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. Forgiving someone doesn't mean that you have to like them. Forgiveness can't depend on a person changing because we can't control that. People may or may not change whether we choose to forgive them or not. But forgiving may not change other people, but it can change us in amazing ways. When we forgive from the heart, well, committing to that forgiveness can make us wiser. It can help us to find ways to make peace with the what is. And the what is could be a person whose personality and behavior remains the same. But when we do forgive from the heart, we may just discover that those old feelings of resentment, dislike, rancor seem to lose their negative charge inside of us, and we may find it easier to detach and respond with more mindfulness and wisdom. React less in the old way that we used to. What I've discovered is that forgiveness can help us gain a greater sense of control over our life, our ability to change, and move on. Sometimes we don't want to forgive because the cost of forgiving can seem too great. The price can feel too high when our pride, our outrage, our sense of justice, our righteous indignation are at stake. But the truth is that the price we pay for not forgiving can cost us far more. It can cost us our peace, our emotional health, our wellness. We can choose to not forgive another because the wrong they did was too wrong, because the unforgivable doesn't deserve to be forgiven. And saying I'm sorry may never compensate for the harm they caused. But we can choose to forgive another, not because they apologized. Saying I'm sorry may never right that wrong. We can choose to forgive them even if they never apologize. We can choose to forgive them even if they don't necessarily deserve it, because we deserve to put our well-being first. You can deny someone forgiveness because you want to punish them. You want to punish what they did. But the only person who ends up being punished is you, because withholding forgiveness puts an enormous emotional burden on our mind, our body, our heart. When you ask yourself, how can I possibly forgive and let go of all these wrongs? Forgive the wrongs of my past, forgive the wrongs of my present. A more mindful question becomes, how can I not? Because not forgiving may not affect the other person, but it will affect you. The price that your heart, your mind and body pay for not forgiving can affect your physical and emotional health in not so good ways. Sometimes our greatest teachers are not those who did everything right, but those who did everything wrong, those who hurt us. Their example serves a purpose. It reminds us of who we don't want to be, how we don't want to live our life. When we forgive, we can see more clearly, understand more wisely that their limitations, their failures are teaching us to love better, to live better. Mindful awareness is what reminds us that these are teachers that, can fuel that strong determination in us to be better people, better parents, better children, better partners, better friends, better siblings, better colleagues. When we keep thinking about those who caused us hurt, those thoughts and feelings are not hurting the person that we refuse to forgive. They're hurting us, the people who most need to heal. Personal experience has taught me that often when we cannot forgive, we may not be able to heal what needs to be healed. Once I blamed the actions of others for taking away my health. And until, one day I realized that blame was never going to get my health back for me. That's when I made the decision to forgive and let that blame go. And that choice is what jump-started my physical and emotional healing. In the end, blame is powerless to repair the past. It just keeps rewounding us and hurting our present, our future. So what I've learned for sure is that forgiveness can offer much greater protection from pain than blame. The wrongs of the past may resist our efforts to forgive them. Our body may use anger, resentment, righteous indignation to make us hold on to those grievances, to our blame. Forgiving, letting go of blame, resisting the urge to blame our parents, our caregivers, our partners, or anyone else for being less than what we deserved, what we needed, what we wanted, takes a mighty resolve. But growing wellness as we age is about asking ourselves, for how long are we going to blame those that hurt us and allow this blame to rule our life? If those who made us feel afraid, unworthy, unlovable, took away the happy and safe childhood that we needed, that we deserved, well, the question becomes, are we going to give them our adulthood as well? We can unconsciously use blame to keep us stuck in unforgiveness. But though this may feel good in the moment, it may just feed and prolong the pain. Blame cannot give back what they took from us. Blame cannot change other people. Only they can do that for themselves. Their childhood experiences probably hurt them, shaped them in not so good ways. But when we set the intention to forgive, it's like we're telling ourselves that their pain, their past, no longer gets to cause our present, and our future any more pain. People who made us feel less than good enough often do so because they don't feel worthy. They don't feel good enough themselves. And so when we forgive, it's like we're setting that intention that their feelings of low self-worth don't get to make us feel less than worthy. When we're able to step inside the history, if only for a moment, of those that hurt us, we can sometimes better understand what caused them to become the people that they are. Now, this greater understanding and even compassion doesn't condone, it doesn't excuse what they did, but it can help us to forgive and begin our own healing. People act according to the resources, the knowledge, who they are at any given moment. They behave according to how their parents raised them and how much they received. And sometimes they may not have received compassion, wise understanding, and love. And so it's very challenging for them to know how to give others what they themselves feel like they never received. When we choose to forgive others, often it's like we are giving them what they cannot give themselves, forgiveness. We can give them what their parents and their parents' parents may not have been able to give themselves, may not have received the gift of forgiveness. Not forgiving is a behavior that we can unconsciously learn from our parents, our grandparents. And so non-forgiveness, not forgiving, can get unconsciously passed on to our children, our grandchildren. But when we learn to forgive, in a sense, we break that pattern. We prevent it from getting passed on. Learning to forgive benefits not just ourselves, but future generations, because they learn by our own example. And even if you don't have children, remember that the cells in your body are your children. And right now, they are giving birth to daughter cells. And when we struggle with whether or not to forgive, if we can just remember that those feelings of anger, hate, bitterness, resentment, well, these feelings are chemical messengers that are sending a very clear message to every cell being born. So we have to ask ourselves, what do we want these daughter cells to inherit? Compassion or hate? When we learn to forgive ourselves, forgive others, we are preventing these feelings from becoming our biochemical legacy. Forgiveness is a great teacher, and it can make us wise when we ask ourselves, what did forgiving this person teach me? I think it's so important to remember that forgiving is not about forgetting. It's not about forgetting what happened. On the contrary, forgiving is about remembering what happened so we can learn from it and using the learning rather than the hurt to protect us. Unconsciously, we can use anger or resentment to keep us on our guard, but in forgiving, we can make the choice to use the wisdom that experience leaves behind to guide us and help us decide if we want to keep this person in our life. Now, forgiving doesn't mean that we have to do that. It doesn't mean that we have to keep that relationship. But forgiving mindfully can help us to make that choice more wisely. Maybe the guidance that we receive, that inner knowingness, tells us that, maybe it's best that this person is no longer in our life. And then the forgiving can help us to often detach, to set more wise boundaries, and help us to maintain a greater physical and or emotional distance. Maybe the lesson lies in learning to put distance between us and the person that we forgave, giving him or her the space and time to follow their path without us. Maybe we choose to keep that relationship. And if we do, we can use the lessons of the past to guide it forward. Maybe the lesson here was that we can trust this person with some things, but not with others, not with our heart. We can love people, forgive their flaws, but mindful forgiving reminds us to keep our expectations in line with who they are, so that we're not disappointed or hurt again. When we forgive, it doesn't mean that we forget the past, but a funny thing can happen to those memories. It can seem as though they lose some of that or all of that negative charge. So that when you think back to something that you forgave, you may just notice that the pain that was in that memory has faded. It's almost as if in forgiving, we disarm, we break the power of that memory to hurt us anymore. It's like forgiveness takes the hurt out of that memory, so it becomes simply a memory, and our body can stop re-experiencing, recycling that old pain in the present moment. So in a sense, it can be that we heal that memory. We heal the present moment because it now feels better in our mind, our body, our heart. When we choose to not forgive, we can keep ourselves trapped in a painful past. But more than that, we can keep ourselves trapped in feelings like victimhood, bitterness, and hatred. And these feelings are energy, dense energy that can begin to accumulate in our body. It can begin to affect our organs and manifest in physical ways. When we don't forgive others, when we don't forgive ourselves, we can block the flow of feelings like sorrow, shame, and blame. And this can put a lot of stress on every cell in our body. So when we choose to forgive, it's like we're setting an intention to connect with these feelings wisely, with compassion and understanding, and make the choice to let them go, to release that stress, to allow those negative feelings to flow out of our heart. And you do this for you. The words, "I forgive you," are just words. It's what we give up when we say them that can make all the difference. And forgiveness is like this blessing that gives us permission to Let go of that old stagnant anger and bitterness, resentment. Let go of those unforgiving thoughts and feelings. Now, this doesn't mean that you're never going to feel that anger again or those feelings again. You may or you may not. But one of the side effects of forgiving is that you may feel them far less. And you're more easily able to just allow them to flow in and out of you. And it's what keeps us reminding ourselves that we've stopped allowing that person to have so much influence and control over how we feel. What I love about forgiveness is that it makes such a difference emotionally and physically because we shed the weight of all those not so good feelings and our body just feels lighter inside. And this is such a wonderful difference. It makes forgiving so worth it and something that you want to keep committing to, that you want to keep doing. Hanging on to grudges, to past hurts, and not forgiving can become an unconscious habit when we keep doing it. But the reverse is also true. Forgiving can become a powerful conscious habit, a learned behavior, when we repeatedly do it. When we repeatedly think forgiving thoughts, we're practicing forgiveness. But more than that, we're creating and growing this neural network called mindful forgiveness. And the more committed we stay to forgiving, the deeper we hardwire this network in our brain. The deeper we grow this belief in the power of forgiveness in our body, in our subconscious mind. And this can make it easier for us to forgive those future wrongs, to, feel more confident of our ability to do that. When we can open our hearts to forgiving the smaller things, the stranger that cut us off on the road, the one that bumped into us and didn't say, "I'm sorry." When we can forgive that rudeness, forgive that ignorance, that hurtful attitude, when we can forgive our absent-mindedness, we pave the way to forgiving the bigger things. Growing and feeding those empowering conversations about forgiveness in our mind is essential, because this is what gives us permission to release the negative emotional charge of those everyday minor slights, annoyances, grievances. I like to tell clients, make forgiveness feel good, like a nice warm bath at the end of a challenging day. Imagine it washing away the power of others to upset you. Imagine it as a color that's just washing away regret. When we can make it a habit to forgive anything that made us feel remorseful, regretful, we can stop going to bed blaming ourselves, shaming ourselves. I believe that it's when we commit to experiencing forgiveness that we can truly know our limitless potential. We may not be able to control who others decide to be, but by renewing our intention to keep forgiving them, we can diminish, we can turn off their power over us and keep that switch in the off position. We may think that forgiveness is this one-time thing, but the truth is we have to commit to doing it every day in our heart. Forgiveness is this ongoing, minute-to-minute commitment. And this is especially true when the person that we forgave is alive, still in our life, triggering those old thoughts and feelings that just make us want to take back our forgiveness. But mindfulness can help us to stay committed. When we can learn to observe those thoughts that just bring up those old feelings of anger, resentment, even hatred, we can, just give them the freedom to come and go. We can, choose not to engage, not to judge them. I think that committing to forgiveness becomes like this emotional state that keeps us conscious of this, daily decision to let go of old thoughts that made us feel like a victim. So what can, help us to keep renewing that vow, to keep forgiveness in our heart? Well, we can renew it in the present moment. We can remind ourselves that, we can forgive the people who push our buttons and forgive ourselves for allowing those buttons to be pushed. When we commit to forgiving that moment, we can reclaim our present, our future in that same moment. Forgiveness can add a wise layer of mindfulness to our being. Because when we, can observe those thoughts that just, tempt us to feed that old hurt, and, when we can just observe those feelings that make us want to undo that forgiveness, we can choose to slowly release, to breathe out that temptation through our nose, our mouth, and remind ourselves in that moment that in forgiving, we're becoming more powerful than the people we forgave. There may come a time when the most important person you may need to forgive is yourself. And as hard as forgiving others can be, sometimes the most challenging thing of all is forgiving ourselves. But the rewards are worth it. I like to tell clients that not forgiving yourself helps no one. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help the person that you hurt. Not forgiving is this passive, ineffectual energy. The act of forgiving is active. It's constructive energy that gets a lot done. The power of self-forgiveness can bring us a greater sense of self-acceptance, peace, and wholeness. If you think about it, there are probably a lot of parts of us that could use a little or a lot of forgiveness. We can choose to forgive our perfectly imperfect selves. We can choose to forgive our flaws, to forgive the part of us that feels guilty or ashamed, the part of us that made decisions that hurt another and betrayed their trust. We can forgive the part of us that we blame for losing a relationship. We can forgive ourselves for being mean when we should have been kind, for feeling insecure when we should have felt confident, for acting foolishly when we should have been wise. And if we think about it some more, there are parts of us that we may have judged harshly, unfairly at one time or another, that we may have treated meanly unkindly, that we may have called unlovable or unworthy. And these parts of us could certainly benefit from hearing the words, "I'm sorry, please forgive me." The healing power of self-forgiveness is great because when we can manage to forgive the whole of us, it's every part of us that gets a fresh start. We may not be able to undo the past, undo our failures, our mistakes, but we can learn from them and use the power of forgiveness to move us forward with less guilt and more resolution, with less harsh judgment and self-blame, and more resolve and mindful awareness. Sometimes what we can forgive in others, we find difficult to forgive in ourselves. And so I say, where is the fairness in that? Self-forgiveness can help make things fair for you. And it can also help the space inside of us to feel safer when we screw up and do things that we regret. Mindful forgiving takes that regret and uses it to show us not how unworthy or not good enough we are, but to show us a better way. Mindfully forgiving ourselves still holds us accountable for what we did or didn't do, but without the guilt and the punishing dialogue, without the mean judgment. So taking full responsibility feels better in our body. Forgiving ourselves doesn't mean that, the hurt that we caused others, what we did or said was right. It doesn't excuse it. But the forgiving helps us to accept that we are perfectly imperfect. Help us make peace with that and use the peace rather than the blame to help us atone for our errors. I think it's the forgiving rather than the not forgiving that can take a mistake and keep us more determined to keep learning from it. And when we forgive the errors of the past feels differently in our body because we let go of so much of the blame and shame. It can give us more energy, more strength to face the consequences of our actions and make them right in a wiser and more productive way. Mindful forgiveness keeps that wise compassion alive in our hearts, compassion that we can share with others and use to make a positive difference, not just in our life, but in the lives of others. I believe in unconditional worthiness, but this belief is a choice, and deciding whether we are worthy of our own forgiveness despite our misdeeds, our mistakes, our errors is a choice, and one that is probably one of the most important and challenging ones in our journey. But so much of being able to live our best life depends on it. Forgiveness can help us to release the pain that we cause others, that they cause us. But if we choose to believe that we are not worthy, that they are not worthy of forgiveness, well then this is a choice that may just keep us trapped in our own pain. If we make worthiness conditional on things beyond our control, things that may or may never happen, the day may never come for forgiveness to arrive in our hearts. I believe that who we are beyond our humanness, that part of us that is divine, pure essence is worthy. And this worthiness is inside of us. We may not see it, we may not believe in it, but I believe it's there waiting for us to discover it, to feel it, and finally accept and own it. When we practice forgiving those thoughts, that self-talk that made us feel insecure and unworthy, that very forgiving can help us to feel more confident, more secure, supported, and worthy. I believe that forgiving ourselves can change us in powerful ways, because the moment that we say the words, "I forgive me," it's like the words, "I am not worthy," disappear from our hearts. It's like we're erasing that belief inside us and replacing it with the words, "I am worthy." Cultivating a wise, gentle compassion can really help us to exercise the right that I believe we all have to forgive ourselves. But of course, whether or not you choose to forgive yourself or anyone else for that matter is a very personal decision that I think no one should judge. However, if you feel ready to forgive a little thing or a bigger thing, feel ready to just let go of that feeling of resentment or anger or victimhood or shame, whatever it may be, you can try this little exercise. You can find a quiet place and just sit. Close your eyes and connect with your heart. Just allow that steady, gentle rhythm to relax you. Breathe in and out of it. And then you can imagine the face of the person you'd like to forgive. Maybe that's an image of you. And then you can say or think the words, "I forgive you," or "I forgive me." And set that intention to forgive. Make sure it's coming from your heart. And then as you slowly breathe out, you can give your body permission to let go of that feeling. And as you breathe in, really feel how open and expansive and empowered your awareness feels. Feel that difference. And you can feel good knowing that in bestowing your forgiveness, you're committed to keeping it in your heart, committed to feeling good about yourself, feeling good about your choice, feeling good about letting go of past hurts, and feeling good about moving forward and using that learning to create a wiser and better future for you. I'd like to say a few words to those of you whose belief system embraces the idea of the soul. There's, of course, our own human agenda, and then there is the soul agenda. And the soul embarks on this human journey in order to learn, in order to experience certain vital lessons. And one of those that offers the greatest potential for the growth of the soul involves forgiveness. So, in order for our soul to experience forgiving through us, things have to happen in our life. And we have to choose whether to forgive or not to forgive. Now, I believe in our soul's infinite compassion for us because it knows that the path to forgiveness can be such a challenging one. So there's no judgment. Our soul regards us with nothing but the purest love and the wisest compassion. And I think it can be so helpful for us to see our life, the things that happen, from the perspective of our soul's agenda and not from our own. I think that doing this can give us the wise compassion, wise understanding, and courage to forgive ourselves, to forgive others. And although, yes, the path to forgiveness can be a hard one, it's good for us to remember that the rewards to our soul are immeasurable. I believe that when we choose self-forgiveness, we're also choosing love, because it's like we're declaring, I love myself enough to forgive myself. I love myself enough to stop making myself feel badly and unworthy. Forgiving ourselves, forgiving others is what can move us towards good change. When the power of forgiveness to restore our wellness, our happiness, becomes a belief in our subconscious mind, it also becomes a belief in our brain, in our body. And I think it's this belief that can unconsciously create a self-fulfilling prophecy that can activate healing on so many levels. The second syllable of the word forgiving is giving. And I think that the act of forgiving can give anyone touched by it, including ourselves, so much. And it can give whatever it is that we forgave a quality that can infuse our journey with more resilience, more strength, more peace, and more wisdom, so we can continue evolving. Thank you for listening with the ear of your heart. As always, I hope that something I've shared can help make even a tiny bit of positive difference in your life. If you have any questions, any comments, please get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.